There are very few people in the history of Hollywood who managed to completely rewrite the rules, not just once, but over and over again across decades. And Diane Keaton stands as one of those rare forces of nature whose journey feels less like a career and more like a quiet revolution unfolding in front of the world. Because she did not arrive with the typical blueprint of stardom, she did not follow the expected path of glamour, perfection, or conformity, and she certainly did not bend herself to fit into the narrow expectations placed on women in the entertainment industry. Instead, she carved out a space so unique, so honest, and so unapologetically her own that it forced the world to expand its definition of what it means to be a leading woman. And if you look closely at her story, you will not just see an actress moving from role to role. You will see a human being constantly choosing courage over comfort, individuality over approval, and truth over image. Even when those choices came with risk, rejection, or misunderstanding, because long before she became an icon, she was simply a young woman from Los Angeles who had a deep desire to express herself, to explore creativity, and to live a life that felt real rather than rehearsed. And that desire led her to the stage, to the unpredictable and often unforgiving world of acting, where success is never guaranteed, and where many people lose themselves trying to become what others want them to be. But Diane did something different, something almost rebellious in its simplicity. She stayed true to her quirks, her voice, her perspective, and in doing so, she slowly began to attract attention, not because she was trying to impress anyone, but because she was impossible to ignore. And when she eventually crossed paths with Woody Allen, it became one of those defining moments that shape a career, not just because of the opportunities that followed, but because it allowed her to step into roles that mirrored her own authenticity, her awkward charm, her intellectual curiosity, and her emotional depth. And through films like Annie Hall, she did something extraordinary. She didn't just play a character, she created a cultural moment, a new kind of heroine who was imperfect, expressive, unpredictable, and deeply human. Someone audiences could connect with on a level that went far beyond surface beauty or scripted perfection. And in doing so, she earned not only critical acclaim, but also a place in cinematic history. Yet, what makes her story truly inspiring is not just the success she achieved, but the way she continued to evolve, even after reaching heights that would have satisfied most people. Because instead of holding onto a single image or identity, Diane Keaton embraced change. She allowed herself to grow older in an industry that often fears aging. She chose to step into roles that reflected maturity, wisdom, and complexity, and she did so with a confidence that quietly challenged the narrative that a woman's value diminishes with time. And in films like Something's Gotta Give, she showed the world that romance, passion, and self-discovery do not belong exclusively to the young. They belong to anyone brave enough to keep living fully. And this is where her story becomes more than just entertainment. It becomes a lesson, a mirror, a reminder that life does not follow a single timeline, that success does not have an expiration date, and that authenticity is far more powerful than perfection. Because Diane Keaton never tried to be the loudest voice in the room. She simply remained a real one, and over time, that realness echoed louder than anything else. And beyond acting, she explored other creative paths, including directing, photography, and writing, proving that identity is not a fixed destination, but a constantly evolving journey. And perhaps one of the most beautiful aspects of her life is her willingness to embrace independence, to build a life that reflects her values rather than societal expectations. Whether that meant choosing not to marry, raising children on her own terms, or pursuing passions that had nothing to do with fame, she demonstrated that fulfillment comes from alignment with who you truly are, not from ticking boxes designed by others. And if you really think about it, her entire life becomes a powerful message to anyone who has ever felt out of place, misunderstood, or pressured to conform, because Diane Keaton's success was never about fitting in. It was about standing out by simply being herself. And that is something incredibly rare in a world that constantly pushes people to blend in. And as you reflect on her journey, you begin to realize that her legacy is not just about awards, iconic roles, or red carpet appearances. It is about courage, the quiet kind of courage that shows up in everyday choices. The courage to be different, the courage to keep going, the courage to embrace every stage of life without apology. And that is why her story continues to inspire not just aspiring actors, but anyone who is searching for meaning, identity, and the confidence to live authentically. Because, in the end, Diane Keaton did not just build a career. She built a life that proves something incredibly powerful, that the most extraordinary thing you can do in this world is to be unapologetically yourself. No matter how long it takes, no matter how many times you have to reinvent yourself, and no matter how many people doubt you along the way, because the moment you choose authenticity over approval, you step into a kind of freedom that no amount of fame can replace. And that is the real story, the real success, and the real inspiration behind Diane Keaton, a woman who didn't just play roles on screen, but redefined what it means to live boldly, truthfully, and without fear in a world that often asks you to do the opposite. And that is exactly why her journey will continue to resonate for generations to come, not just as a story of Hollywood's success, but as a timeless reminder that your uniqueness is not your weakness, it is your greatest strength. And the sooner you embrace it, the sooner you begin to live a life that is truly your own. What makes the journey of Diane Keaton even more powerful is not just what she achieved when the spotlight was brightest, but how she carried herself when the world inevitably shifted its attention elsewhere. Because that is where most stories fade. That is where many people struggle to hold on to relevance, identity, and purpose. Yet, Diane did something quietly extraordinary. She refused to measure her worth by the noise of the industry, and instead, she built a deeper connection with herself, understanding that true confidence does not come from constant validation. It comes from self-acceptance. And this mindset allowed her to navigate phases of her career that others might have seen as decline, but she transformed into reinvention, because she never stopped creating, never stopped exploring, and never allowed herself to be boxed into a single version of who she was supposed to be. And this is something that becomes incredibly important when you think about how society often treats aging, especially for women, where there is this unspoken pressure to either cling to youth or quietly disappear. But Diane Keaton rejected both options. She chose a third path, one that very few dared to walk. She chose visibility with authenticity. She chose to show up exactly as she was, embracing her age, her experiences, her evolving identity, and in doing so, she didn't just keep her place in Hollywood. She expanded it. She made space for conversations that were long overdue. She proved that life does not become smaller with time. It becomes richer, deeper, and more meaningful if you allow it to. And her performances in later years reflected this beautifully, carrying a sense of wisdom and emotional depth that can only come from someone who has truly lived, someone who has faced doubts, insecurities, and changes, yet continued to move forward with grace and curiosity. And what's even more inspiring is how she carried this philosophy beyond acting into her personal passions. Because Diane Keaton is not just an actress, she is also deeply connected to architecture, design, and photography, areas where she found another way to express her vision of the world. And this reveals something important about her character. She is not driven by the need to stay relevant. She is driven by the desire to stay alive in the fullest sense of the word, creatively, emotionally, and intellectually. And that is a powerful lesson, because so many people spend their lives chasing relevance instead of fulfillment, approval instead of authenticity, and in that chase, they lose the very essence of who they are. But Diane's life reminds you that it is never too late to explore a new interest, to develop a new passion, or to rediscover parts of yourself that you may have ignored. And this idea becomes even more meaningful when you consider the courage it takes to live differently, to make choices that others may not understand. Because Diane Keaton's personal life has never followed a conventional script, she chose independence over expectation. She embraced motherhood later in life on her own terms, and she built a life that reflects her values rather than society's timeline. And while some may see that as unconventional, it is precisely that courage to live authentically that makes her story so compelling, because it challenges the idea that there is only one right way to live. And instead, it opens the door to endless possibilities, reminding you that your life is your own to design, your own to shape, and your own to redefine as many times as you need. And if you look closely, you will see that Diane Keaton's greatest achievement is not a single award, a single role, or a single moment. It is the consistency with which she chose herself again and again.